Hi, I'm Effie, welcoming you on behalf of Tse Chen Ling. We are so very happy to be presenting Dr. Jan Willis, who will be speaking from her personal experience on Buddhism and social justice. Dr. Willis's career as a scholar and teacher spans over 50 years, including 36 at Wesleyan University. She is originally from a small town near Birmingham, Alabama, and she marched there with Dr. King in 1963. She first met Tibetan Buddhists in India and Nepal when she was 19 while traveling through Asia in the early 70s. She became a student of Lama Yeshe, who encouraged her academic pursuits. She went on to earn degrees from Cornell and Columbia and has published widely, including one of my favorite books, Dreaming Me, Black, Baptist, and Buddhist, One Woman's Spiritual Journey. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Hi. Well, I was saying a bit earlier that I'm really thrilled that Venerable Carol and Effie invited me to give this talk at Tse Chen Ling. And I was saying that they couldn't have, when they invited me in early June to do this talk, we couldn't have known that we were going to have in the last day or so this exuberance, this joy, this time of feeling hopeful once again. So it's excellent. It's good timing. Was it last night or 2 nights ago? Just last night, maybe. President Biden said to us that we all had a choice. We had a choice again. And the choice is between hope, he said, between hope and hate. Well put. We have a choice. It's in our hands. He gave us the responsibility as well as the personal choice, our own making. We have it in our hands. So tonight I'm to talk about Buddhism and social justice. And I want to say a few things before I show you a group of slides that I hope will illustrate, one, how it was when I was a young person, a teenager, the reason we have to keep alert, the reason that freedom is a constant struggle is because our history shows us this. We may be fortunate enough to take a step forward, but then, as Carol Anderson, many other people know, you take a step forward and there's pushback, and there's always, it seems, 2 steps backwards. So we have to be vigilant. Okay, so I want to say a few things. Buddhism and social justice. Social justice, what would that look like? Well, it would look like something that people of color in this country haven't felt yet, quite yet. It would look like things were equal. And what kinds of things? Well, important things for life, you know. What would be equal? We would have equal rights. Everyone, by virtue of being in this country, a human being would have equal rights. We would have equal opportunities. What makes me sad is to see young children where the glimmer of joy is sort of fading from their eyes because they know already at a young age that there are going to be barriers for their dreams. This, I feel, is one of the saddest experiences. Everyone who is a human being should have equal opportunities and access. and they should have equal protections. Social justice means the equality of all these three things as a bare minimum. Equal rights, equal human rights, equal opportunities, equal protection under the law. So simple. But it's amazing that depending upon what color you are and what class, I suppose, but mainly in this country, what color you are, those things are not guaranteed for all of us. And right now, as the president reminds us, we have a choice. The choice of whether we want to see America finally exemplify and embody its promise, which for people of color, one has to say, it is never demonstrated. Langston Hughes' poem, "It was never America to me." That great America. Not yet. Oh. But we can dream about it. We can think about it. And we can hear Du Bois saying to Black people, asking them the question, what is it if suddenly there were some miracle that could make you just have in the palm of your hand everything you ever wanted? What would it be? Would it be a car? Would it be a house? Would it be? No, it would be that promise fulfilled. It would be feeling that you were free in this country. Wouldn't it? Why did King choose 1963 to start his civil rights campaign? People said, because he had done this, that, and the other. No, because 1963 was 100 years after Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. King, like other thoughtful people, looked around and said, well, I have this proclamation. Now, where's the emancipation that's supposed to have come with it? I have the proclamation, but still not the emancipation. I'm reminded that a senator in the Congress, when the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were being debated, said, we gave them their freedom. What else is it they want? And you can hear just in the tone of they, that word that separates us rather than joins us together in the human family. What else do they want? Well, I just say, is a person free if they're free without land, without capital, without education, without a means to livelihood? Is that freedom? Well, that senator was arguing that that was freedom. We gave them their freedom. What more do they want? This is what Du Bois was asking. People on the frontier, people on the outside might be able to give us a better picture of what the promise of America truly holds, because they know there's got to be something more than the present situation. So we're standing at this pivotal point, this timeless point, this incredible moment in history where we have to choose once again. Will we choose democracy, or will we just throw up our hands and let the autocracy come? Will we choose hope? Will we choose hate? Will we choose hope? Will we choose fear? I'm reminded that one of the Bodhisattvas' greatest gifts to beings is actually the gift of fearlessness. So I think sometimes people, we Buddhists even, we have a tendency to think, well, here's Buddhism, it's over here. And here's social activism. It's over here. They're two different things. We want to say they're two different things, but they're not. In my experience, they're not. And I think it can be argued that in the Buddha's experience, they were not. I tell people that from the moment the Buddha stood up from being blissed out under the Bodhi tree, and he was blissed out for 7 weeks under 7 different trees. The legend says, on that 49th day, he remembered that, oops, I came here for the benefit of others. So I better give up this being blissed out myself and get about the work I came here to do, to liberate beings. Okay. Until we are awakened, we live in a relative world. And sometimes we hear, I think we've probably heard in Buddhist centers, well, there are these 2 truths that the Buddha taught. There's absolute truth and there's relative truth. And you should just get on with it and try to get to that absolute truth. This is usually spoken by people with privilege to people who are lodging some kind of complaint about not feeling so included, right? You have to check up on who's saying that. Let's hurry on to the absolute point of view, right? And who's not quite there yet. And I just want to say that my understanding is, and this is from teaching a lot as well as experience, is that until we are awakened, we all live in a relative world. And so we have to note that and act like that. So I want to say, I think that activism for the Buddha was part and parcel of his activities. When he was awakened, when he became awakened, when he stood up and said, and made it clear that he thought of others, Buddhism became engaged at that point. They say engaged Buddhism. What's that? It's Buddhists being active in the world. Now they're Buddhists, so let's quickly say they act nonviolently. They act nonviolently. That's what puts all those people we might think of, the Dalai Lama, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Buddha, Sister Chung Kyung, all those people we could come up with. They're engaged Buddhists. They're Buddhist and they're activists too, but they're Buddhist, which means that they know Dhammapada verse 183, which says what? Do no harm. Practice what is good. Discipline the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. Do no harm. That's first. Practice what is good. That's second. Discipline the mind in order to do the first 2. That is the teaching of all the Buddhas. So if someone says that there's a Buddhist in Myanmar and he's saying that Rohingyas ought to be, I say, no. He can't be a Buddhist. He's wearing monk's robes, but it's violent what he's doing. It's violence that he's talking about. So he's not a Buddhist. Am I arguing too strenuously? Nonviolence is the first principle of Buddhism. So I was saying that for the Buddha, these things weren't 2 separate things either. Now, I have a tendency to say all the time, I say it in groups and in classes. I say the Buddha was revolutionary for his time. Why? Because he founded this intentional community that was so inclusive in a very stratified society. It was revolutionary. But just this past weekend, when I taught a day-long 10 to 5 course on women and Buddhism. And I took the first hour. It was a 2-semester course in 6 hours, right? 7 hours. We took a break. And I took the first hour and I said, okay, I'm going to try to describe for you, and I'll do it here. Describe for you what Aryan society was like. What was society and culture like at the time of the Buddha? And I did that with graphs and, and I pointed out all the different stratifications in society. And I will say to you tonight that one of the best ways to get an idea of this is to read chapter 5 of A.L. Basham's, Basham, A.L. Basham's book, The Wonder That Was India. In chapter 5, he gives a nutshell of Aryan society. And it's incredibly well done, very detailed. And you can skip the Sanskrit, but it's very detailed. So easily, what was the society like where the Buddha lived and practiced? Well, it was a society. Okay, so Basham starts India. It's the most populous democracy in the world. The United States is second. It is, and this is regardless. There's Modi. You can have whatever opinions you have, but generally, India has a constitution. It's a democracy, and it's the most populous democracy in the world. Okay, but here's the crinkle with Aryan society is that it was a democracy which recognized, or at least set it up this way, that all beings are not created equal. What do I mean by that? In India, people were rigidly put into categories. Rigidly put into categories, and these categories were called varnas in Vedic Sanskrit and later in hybrid Sanskrit, varnas. And that word is actually, I don't make these things up, actually cognate with the word varnish. It had to do with coloration, pigmentation. Because the Aryans were the white, blue-eyed folk who had started a trek across the subcontinent, from the steeps of southern Europe all the way to India, and they came to a stop in north central India. And there, what had been led by warriors, the Brahmins said, we don't need the warriors to be in the lead anymore. We need to keep up the communications with God. We are Brahmins, that is, we control breath, that's cognate breath. Braha is how we communicate with the gods. And so we're still in demand as a settled people, but the warriors become secondary. And everyone else, the commoners, then 2 classes of so-called Shudras, pure and impure. And the impure are who we know today, and the British knew as the unscheduled caste, the untouchables. And we know today as Dalits, because these categories are still actively existing in India today. So Aryan society, what was it like? It had 4 classes of beings, and in each class there were different job categories, and people were not mobile. You were born into a given jati. You were born into a job. If you're born a rickshawala, that's what you do your entire life, even though as a rickshawala your life might be 7 or 8 years. Tikaha, sorry, my overemphasized Hindi, moving right along. But those categories were strictly enforced. All right, there were 4 varnas, and within each varna there were countless subdivisions depending upon what job. So the most impure did the most impure activities. So untouchables, what do? They pick up coal in between the railroad tracks, you know. They're covered in soot. The dirtiest jobs go to the lowest beings. And in this, you know, they recognize this. This is how society ran. People didn't have ambitions to change caste. All right. So that's really general, but so it was rigid, society was rigidly divided by job categories and by birth. Then the Brahmins divined that people should be allowed what they call the 4 stages of life, the 4 ashramas, the stations where you abide. You know, we go to Pondicherry ashram, meditate, you know, we think of it as yoga retreat place. But the word ashrama means a place, a station. Mm? So the Aryan system of 6th century BC, India said there were 4 stations of life. People had a right to these 4, right? They were children, so there was childhood where a person studied, memorized the Vedas, studied at the foot of the tree, you know, did their studies, and then they could go to the second stage or ashrama, householding, grihasta. They literally hold a house. Then, thirdly, if and when they saw their grandchildren, when they saw their grandchildren, and some texts said their grandchildren's children, then and only then could they seek their own spiritual welfare. So they could go to the forest and become what were called hermits or vanaprasthas, those stationed in the vana, in the forest. And if they managed to live long enough as hermits and they gained some insight, then they could re-enter society as what were called sadhus or sannyasins, wandering ascetics, to distribute what wisdom they gained for a little bakshish, a little reward. Those 4 were rigid. So when I was a hippie in India in the 70s, on train rides, the first question that Indians would ask is, how old are you? Which meant, don't you know what station you should be? You're too young to be talking about seeking a teacher. You're too young for that. These categories are so strong that they've held for thousands of years. Together. Last one I mentioned to describe Indian society is to say that the Brahmin said, well, okay, we'll give you something. you menial folk. We'll say that you can have 3 aims. And the 3 aims, Basham, the incredible British Indologist with the ruddy jowls and his pipe in his hand. I actually heard him give a talk once, and he was famous for describing these 3 aims that were allowed by Aryan society as the 3 Ps, the 3 Ps. The 3 were Dharma, Artha, and Kama. But he described them as the 3 Ps, and he said every Aryan citizen could strive for what? Piety, and his jaw shook. Piety or dharmic practice, you know, follow a religious tradition. For profit, and pleasure, because kama is typically defined as sexual pleasure. Kama Sutra, not karma, kama, just K-A-M-A. Oh, so Basham's 3 Ps. Now, if you noticed, I said to the folk taking women in Buddhism, if you noticed, women are nowhere included here. Were they included in Aryan society? Well, no. Women and girls were always at best but a child in law. And they were bound by what are called the 3 obediences. India and China still long-rooted these traditions. Women are bound by 3 obediences, namely to their father when they're children, to their husband when they're adults, and to their son to their sons in old age. And if the sons aren't there, or the sons don't take care of them, they become a widow. What's the worst thing in Aryan society? A widow, a woman who does not belong to or with a man is a pariah to the whole of society. People run from her. They run away when they see her in the streets. So I said to my students, so what does the Buddha do in a society like this? Why do I say he was revolutionary? Because the Buddhists founded an intentional community which accepted into its fold human beings from any varna, regardless of caste. You could become a follower and a practitioner with Buddha, regardless of what stage of life. The Buddha had old practitioners with him. He had youthful practitioners with him. So it didn't matter what varna, it didn't matter what stage of life. And those three, the three P's, that didn't matter either. But the thing is, regardless of gender, the Buddha allowed for the going forth of women into his order. That was revolutionary in the 6th century BC India. Only one other spiritual leader, and his name was Mahavira, the founder of China, allowed for that. So when I perhaps too casually say, the Buddha was quite revolutionary, for his time. He did remarkable things just by founding that community that was so inviting, not only accepting, but inviting of all those disparate people, which Aryan society said must be kept separate. This was worse than, I don't know what it was worse than. I was going to say than the Jim Crow South or South African apartheid. This was really embedded more than generationally, but thousands of years. And the Buddha broke it in one fell swoop by founding a Sangha that accepted all. He was revolutionary. Okay. So for the Buddha, I say that's a kind of social activism. Whew. In that environment was quite amazing. Okay. So what I learned from doing this weekend seminars, I shouldn't say that so lightly. Maybe people don't know what Aryan society was like. So I shouldn't just sort of flippantly say, well, the Buddha was really revolutionary. He allowed women. He allowed all the caste. He allowed, tikaha, what stage, what ashram, didn't matter. If you wanted to practice Dharma, if you wanted to listen to it, to study it, to meditate upon it, and to gain insight from it, you were free to do so. And then I spent some time with them going over Kulavagga 10, the text that describes the founding of the nuns order. And that's problematic. I don't think the Buddha had anything to do with that text. But that's for another occasion, perhaps. Okay. I never do it. Okay. I had a timer here, it didn't start it. So the Buddha, for the Buddha, I guess the point is, in my reading of Buddhism, Buddhist history, Buddhist literature, the Buddha was quite ahead of his time. The Buddha was looking forward and not backwards. The Buddha was a reformer, a great reformer of society, and people flocked to him. Women in particular flocked to the Buddha's teaching, just as they did to Mahavir. Okay. And what did the Buddha offer? He offered a community that was based on what? Respect for fellow practitioners. Support for them, for each other. A responsibility for each other. Oh, to me, that sounds like what King had in mind with the beloved community. King didn't found that term, but that's what he had in mind when he says beloved community, because a beloved community is where each member counts, and it goes without saying. If America lives up to its promise, all of us here count. There is equality in terms of rights, in terms of opportunity, and in terms of protection. If protection is needed, it's provided. Oh, Tikaha. One last comment before the slides is I wrote a paper in 2020, and that was the last time I gave a talk at Tse Chen Ling. Dharma Matters had just come out, and I was talking about this new book. But it was 2020, right? And I think I gave that talk a little after April when this book came out. But you know what else was happening in 2020? That big thing called a pandemic, right? Whew. Bad timing, publish a new book. Bad timing for all of us who experienced that, especially those early days. Those early days when we didn't know, whether we were going to survive it, right? We didn't know what caused this thing. My sister, devout Baptist, says, Dean, come on now. What more proof could you have? What could be invisible, covers the entire world, and we don't know what it's about, and people are dying as a result of it? Come on. It was like, this is a proof not only for God's existence, but for end times, according to my sister, right? But we were all scared, right? 2020. So I wrote a piece in 2020. I just want to give you just a little of the beginning of it. It was published in the Chicago Literary Journal's Anthology of Black Writers. And it was a piece I called Stayed on Freedom. In the 60s, with the Civil Rights Campaign, a wonderful woman, Bernice Reagan Johnson, who died just last week, right? Bernice Reagan Johnson founded the Freedom Singers. She was 14 when the Civil Rights Campaign started, and she knew, that when young people were arrested, when they were marching, when they were in jail cells, what they did was sing, and it lifted everybody's spirits. And yeah, okay, so Stayed on Freedom. So what Bernice Reagan says is, these were gospel songs, and just like they rejuvenated our spirits in church, they rejuvenated our spirits when we were being activists. Right? So I titled this essay "Stayed on Freedom," and that's what civil rights singers sang. But it's from Stayed on Jesus. Woke up this morning with my mind. It was stayed on freedom. That's what we sang. But in church, you said stayed on Jesus. My mind was fixed on Jesus. But as so often happened during those civil rights days, we change a word or two, and then it would become a big movement song, right? So Bernice said similar things. At any rate, so the title of my essay is Stayed on Freedom. So I said, here, I'm sitting here, and we're in the midst, the world is in the midst of these three interconnected phenomena. And the phenomena are the coronavirus, right? The economic collapse that has come about as a result of the virus, and the now open, everyone can see the incredible police brutality, because George Floyd happened in May of 2020. The incredible police brutality that people of color in this country suffer. It was all visible. Why? Because those of us who were fortunate enough to what did they call it? Remain in place, stay in, we could stay inside because we weren't the people who were delivery folk, who were the meat packers, who were the people who we called indispensable for the first months of the virus. They were indispensable. And then we noticed who's dying in incredible numbers, those very indispensable people. And does most of society care? No, we saw before our own eyes indispensable people become disposable, become nobodies, right? Except for the people at the hospitals, the doctors and nurses. You know, remember that early time? Do you remember when people in the evenings would come out on their balconies in Europe and applaud all the healthcare workers? Right. Except the indispensables who became quickly disposable. The people who worked at the meatpacking company, the people who were delivery drivers, the people who were stock clerks in the stores. They died in incredible numbers, and they were just replaced. These are low-income people who can't afford, who don't have the privilege of staying at home, who live in usually extended families where disease travels. These people became dispensable. So I watched that. And then there was the 9-minute and 42-second murder of George Floyd in front of our eyes, where we all had to become complicit because we all had to watch. We didn't have to watch, but it was shown over on a loop, over and over and over and over again. And what was it? A white man's knee on a black man's throat. This was incredibly brutal, and we all saw it. So I said, this in the first paragraph of this essay, I said, so I've spent a lot of time these days thinking about freedom. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what freedom might feel like. Because I was sitting in a country that had been founded on the murder of indigenous people who lived here, right? All those people we don't talk about. It's like Columbus discovered a new world and it was empty. Didn't have any people in it, right? That's how we tell the history. He discovered a new land. And 95% of indigenous people died of those diseases. 95%. The mind can't comprehend that kind of death. And then the place was built up by people who were captured overseas and brought here. Oh, Tigaha. I was thinking a lot of time, like, what would freedom feel like in this country for a person of color? All right, I'm going way too long with this part. Tigaha. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, not sick, all men are created equal. But we don't act that way. Yet, that's the promise of America. And now, what's the new promise? That we'll either go to autocracy with a dictator and hatred, or there's the promise that we'll become a multiracial democracy. Whew, you think? That's the promise. That's the hope. That's what we can choose for the time being. All right. And if we succeed, then we must remain vigilant because freedom is a constant struggle. One step forward, two steps back. We marched in the 60s for voting rights. 100 years, James Baldwin ends his, in a couple of minutes, Effie. I like those slides to start being shown. So,
Okay.
Great, you heard me, lovely. So James Baldwin ends his famous letter to his nephew, who was also named James. That's recorded in Fire Next Time. Besides saying that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced, he says in the letter to his nephew, the very last sentence, we all know that the country is celebrating the emancipation 100 years to the country is celebrating 100 years of emancipation, 100 years too soon. James Baldwin, the repetition, and it's just fabulous, right? King thought the same thing. Here we are, 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863. Here we are in 1963, and all we have is maybe this piece of paper, the proclamation, but not yet the emancipation. That's why in 1963, after his successes in Montgomery, he decided to bring the civil rights campaign to the city he called the most segregated city in the South, Birmingham, Alabama. And I live just a few miles with my family. I live just a few miles outside of downtown Birmingham. So I'm going to show you some slides. And I understand that what I'm doing is sometimes people say to me after they see these slides, we didn't think it was really that bad. Well, we lived. I'm alive. My folks lived. They raised me and my sister, and we had a family, and there was love there. But this was real. Okay, so here's Jan. Isn't she cute? Okay, I don't know what you're thinking or saying, but this is me, age 4. And I show it because it shows the love my parents had for me. This is a studio picture, right? There I am with ribbons and that little pearl watch on my hand and these Shirley Temple curls. And that's the reason I'm actually pouting. I've asked my parents over the years, why was I so angry with that photo? Well, it was because I absolutely hated Shirley Temple curls. That was a big thing for Black kids. We had to get our hair straightened, and then we had to get our hair curled. I hated it with a passion that you can see in a 4-year-old's face. But I know they loved us, This was something special. All right, Jan at 4. Next slide, please, Effie. And here's my father. This is my father, whose name is Orem. At his graduation from high school, my father was president of the senior class and valedictorian of the class. My father, his studio picture, so smart. My father was not only my biggest support throughout my life till he died at age 92. He used to ask me those questions, got a little mind just turning, baby, daughter, he always called me daughter. Daughter, where does the light go when you flick that switch? Where does it go? And I'm going, where does it go? No, it just set my mind just to going. He always would come in with these big questions for me. And I originally went to college in physics because of those kind of questions. At any rate, my father was valedictorian at the same school where I later became valedictorian. Some years later, you'll note, And I entered school in 1954. That was the year of Brown v. Board of Education. But I was bused to an all-Black school, same one my father had gone to, so many years before. I was bused to make sure that the federal law, which said desegregation, which said integration must be observed because desegregation was against the law, that schools that were separate were not equal. Brown v. Board of Education, brought by the parents of a little girl. It was always the little girls that brought these cases. At any rate, so in 1954, I entered college, but that just meant that the Alabama Supreme Court went into overdrive to make sure that the federal law was not put into practice. So when it was time for me to go to high school, even though there was a perfectly good high school right there in Docena, the mining camp where I was raised, I had to be bused 7 miles to a county all-Black high school, same one as my father had graduated from. So when people say states' rights, or they say that shouldn't be a federal decision anymore, it should go back to the states, look out. Because when states' rights have it, they prevent federal law. This is a federal republic we have. So there are national laws and then there are states' laws. And I've experienced what the state laws do. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this is my father graduating. Okay, this is my father. I love this picture. Just take a minute to look at this picture. I found this picture. It was a postage stamp size, and I blew it up. And when I dabbled in oil painting, it was the first picture I painted in oils. This is a photograph of my father. Soon after he started work. I love this picture. One, because he's so dapper and good looking. And second, because his face tells so many stories. I mean, there's anger there. It's like, okay, now I'm an adult. My father had tried to sneak away. He ran away, actually, and stayed on the floor in a dormitory at Talladega, at Alabama A&M, sorry. And then his father found him a week later and said, boy, you know, you got to go to work. And this was like a week into work. My father says he remembers the day when the white foreman came and told all the Black men, called them all sorts of derogatory names, and told them what their job would be. So I can see the anger here in my father's face. And I can also see the tenderness. My Aunt Nate, who is still alive in 95, says to me, that was the last picture your father ever took alone. Your father never took a single picture alone. This is why. Next slide, please. Here's my mom and dad. There's Orem on the left and Dorothy on the right. My father was always in pictures thereafter with my mother. And people say, you know, they read Beloved or something. They don't understand how Black people survived in this country because they were so brutalized and demeaned and mistreated and counted as cattle. How did they survive? They survived like this, with other Black people, in families, in communities, in loving communities. That's how we made it. I'm thankful. So my father took a number of pictures like this thereafter, always with my mom, Dorothy. So here's Orem and Dorothy. Beautiful. Next slide, please. Okay. Here's me at the, I don't know, 10 or 11, 12 maybe, I don't know. It was an Easter Sunday. And there I am with the Shirley Temple curls again. Hey, them still. And the bows and the little red and white polka dot dress. And my mother had this thing that my sister and I were so close. My sister's a couple of years older, that she dressed us alike. So we both hated that. She dressed us as though we were twins. So somewhere my sister's standing off to the side in that same outfit. But I show this picture because it says so many things. It shows the corner of Docena, Alabama. And on this corner, there's forest all around, L shape in your mind. Imagine L. This is the corner of this whole community. The community is split right down the middle between blacks and whites. We're all poor. Everyone works in the mine. Which mine? Coal mine. Which mine? Probably the 12th mine, the Docena mine. But we thought it was called Docena. All right. But my father, his father, and his brother, who were that tall tree on the right, was in my grandparents' backyard. And the house next to them, going away, was my uncle's yard. So there were 3 Willis families on the corner of this community, on the edge of Docena. And all 3 Willis families had heads of household, men, who worked in the steel plant. And so they kept jobs, whereas the mine had closed when I was 2 years old. So this was really a very poor rural community outside, 7 miles outside of downtown Birmingham. Okay. So the other pertinent point is there were 300 families, maybe fewer, 300 houses. No, many fewer in Docena. And the alley that's behind me here, this alley that ran behind my grandmother and my uncle's house and straight from ours. What I wanted to tell you about Docena is it's split down the middle, and we, as Black people, we're on the far end of the camp. So you come into the camp, and then you turn right, and you go a couple of blocks, and you're in the Black section. But if you just turn into the camp and go straight, you're in the white section. And we were taught very early on not to cross certain streets. Why? Because we would touch the backyards of white families. That was a no-no. Why? Well, it was Jim Crow South, where things were segregated, where there were signs over the water fountains and so forth. But it was also because a Klan area chief lived in those. And so the KKK was every day in Docena, and you didn't want to come into contact with it. Nope, you went ahead, Effie, but it's okay. You didn't want to go back once if you can. The Klan area chief lived there, and so you didn't want to become conspicuous. Because as a Black person, if you became conspicuous, the Klan was going to visit you. So years after this photo was taken, 5 or 6 years after this, when I got scholarships to go to college, I got all sorts of scholarships in 65 from the Ivy League schools that were just deciding this would be their contribution to uplifting the race. So they gave to these small rural communities throughout the South scholarships, full scholarships. I didn't pay a penny to go to Cornell. And I had scholarships to Cornell and Columbia and Bryn Mawr and Vassar and all these schools. Okay. So I said, you didn't want to become conspicuous. Well, it was put in the Black newspaper, a 4-page, 2 pages folded, that not Jan Willis, but the daughter of Orem and Dorothy Willis has been awarded these scholarships to northern schools, not Ivy League schools, but to northern schools. And it turned out the Klan members read that paper. And so as a result of getting those scholarships, the KKK visited our house one night. Now, next slide, please. So this is not a picture that I took, luckily. And this cross is much bigger and taller than the one that was placed in that alleyway by Klan members as a result of my getting scholarships to college. The Klan visited our house. First, they went through the camp, the mining camp, honking horns, cars and trucks, honking. And that meant in the Black community, we knew the Klan was after someone. We just didn't know who. Then all the cars came to a stop in front of our house. This is the middle of the night, right? Middle of the night. My father's working graveyard shift, so he's not home. My mother tells my sister and me to get down, try to get under the bed, and she goes to the door with a pearl handle 22 caliber little handgun, and she's going to be our protector. And the Klan comes, all the cars and trucks stop, and the Klan gets out, and they put up a cross. They set it up, and they light it on fire. And we held our breath because we thought the next thing is they'll rush the house or they'll throw a bomb. What I want to say to you and impress upon you is this terror was real. This is not made up. These things happened to Black people when I was growing up. So I know about what hate looks like. Okay. I had been to birthday parties that the Klan had interrupted. Why is somebody making all that damn music? Why are they being happy in this house? They would just take over, come into a Black family where there's a birthday party going on and shut it down. And I used to wonder when I was little, why can't the parents fight back? You know, I'm naive. I think, why can't they protect us? You know? So I was bitter about that for a time. At any rate, my mother, she took up her post at our front door, willing to take down whoever tried to come in our house. And luckily for us, that night, they just did their mumbo jumbo and got back in their cars and drove off. Well, the terror had been done. We were pretty traumatized. But what happened to me was I was fascinated. I was gobsmacked. I was scared to death. But I didn't get down by the bed. I got on the bed and looked out the window. And I was amazed at what I saw. Because what I saw was men, women, and children. Next slide, please, Effie. Next slide. There were women. And women were proud clanspeople. Okay, but what I saw out that window was men, women, and children in robes. Yeah, I was going off to college. Was that reason for having a cross burning? Well, I didn't think so. But the Klan wanted to teach me that I was stepping out of my place by going north to college, let alone going to some Ivy League snooty place. And so they came to let me know, my family know, and the rest of the Blacks on that side of the community, that what I had done was become conspicuous, and how dare we do that. But what I thought, and this is what I write about in my memoir, as I looked at those people, I thought two things. I thought, gee, those robes are different colors. Like some of these folk have on purple satin robes, and some have on red satin robes, and some have on white. How could I see that? Well, I could see that in the glow from the burning cross. And the second thing that really made an impression upon me was that there were children there. So I had this strong urge to tell them that they were making a mistake. They're making a mistake. Because clearly they are a family. There are families out there. And we are a family in here. We are a family in here. So you're making a mistake. You're wrong about something. You don't recognize our actual commonality. That was my strong, well, I was too scared to say those things. But I certainly thought of my father's shotgun in the closet, and I knew I didn't want that. What I wanted was to tell these people, to teach these people that they were making a mistake. Next slide, please. So during this time, there's been a successful boycott led by Rosa Parks, who was not the innocent seamstress. She had been trained as an activist. She had been to Highlander School. She knew the incredible Ella Baker. So Ella Baker said when she heard that they were starting a boycott in Montgomery and that Rosa Parks had sat down on the bus and refused to give up a seat, Ella Baker in New York said, "Oh, Montgomery doesn't know what's coming his way," because she knew Rosa. I mean, so we have totally misrepresented that history. I give a talk on the women who stood behind and mentored and challenged King, and Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer were certainly women who did that. So there's been success with the Montgomery boycott. In 56, they had won everything. So it was a number of years before King finally decides Birmingham be the next big venue. Okay. And there are many, many conversations going on about whether that's wise. And there are conversations between King and Ella Baker. At any rate, so I show the picture of King, and I think King was certainly the right man for the time. But I also think that we give too much credit to him for the movement. And there were a whole lot of women behind him. Next slide, please. So he was great. Oh, and this man was great. And we don't hear enough about him, though he died earlier this year. James Lawson, who's on the left in the picture. James Lawson was actually the person who taught nonviolent strategies to all those early sit-in folk in Nashville. And those sit-in folk included John Lewis and Diane Nash and some of the other civil rights people who became famous because they went on to teach others for the freedom rides, how to behave, how to accept punishment, there are strategies. And so I want to say, you can ask about later, there are nonviolent strategies that James Lawson taught until he died. He taught every year a course on nonviolence at the University of California in LA. So King tapped Lawson. They met in Oberlin. King was giving a speech, and King found out that Lawson had been a conscience objector, had been in prison for 3 years. After prison, had gone to India and studied Gandhian nonviolence. And King was smart enough to know, he said to James Lawson, "You should come south and teach these young people how to do it." And James Lawson decided he would. And so he came to Nashville, where Fisk University students became the first to sit in at those lunch counters. James Lawson taught them nonviolent discipline. Remember? Discipline the mind. He taught nonviolent discipline and strategy to all us nonviolent protesters, even the children. Thank you. Next slide, please. In Birmingham, the marches went on for 5 weeks and a few days. And in the last few days, King was arrested the second day. And then he was in jail most time. And he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail and so forth. And he came under a lot of criticism from his inside folk saying, "Martin, you've gone too far with this." And Martin said, "I'm going to have a march with just children." Because I marched every day I could. So did all my classmates. We didn't have cars, but the county school buses would come and open their doors and say, "Going downtown," and we'd all board and go downtown. And so what was our first stop downtown? The 16th Street Baptist Church. And you may have heard of it. It's later bombed during Sunday school. That was our first start. So we stopped there, we went up the steps, and then we had the women, those elder women in the church, give us tests. We signed a pledge. King writes about it in the book that's about this 1963 year. The book is called Why We Can't Wait. King mentions the pledges that we children took. He names them all. And we took pledges like, we shall be courteous to everyone we meet. We shall remember Jesus every day. We shall carry Jesus with us. We shall not lift a hand even in our own defense. And then we signed our parents' name and our addresses, right? So our parents could find us if anything happened. Okay, but the test involved signing a statement, pledges, that we would remain nonviolent, and then having the church women give us tests. And so they would say to me, Janice, Janice, are you ready to march today? Can you keep calm? You're gonna be calm, not gonna raise a hand? And I say, yes, ma'am. I'm still scared of the dogs, but I'm ready, I think. And they would say, all right, Missy, you stand over in that line. And then we would line up in twos. And we were eligible to march that day because the elder women had said so. But then if you were a little fired up, those women are saying, I've heard them say in my presence, John, you ready? You ready to march? Yes, ma'am, I'm ready. Well, if you responded like that, you would hear, no, John, no, baby, you can't march today. I think you better sit down over there and work on your Sunday school lesson. You may not march today. And John couldn't go. Why? Because John was liable to not be nonviolent. He was liable to raise his hand. He was liable to fight back. So he couldn't go. We were screened by those church women. So this is where I learned that nonviolence takes discipline. Okay. The Children's March was the last 3 days of those weeks of marching. Only children, no adults present. That brought the attention of John Kennedy, saying, we have to have the Birmingham people stop with the dogs, stop with the hoses. There are children involved. This is a national disgrace. Stop it. And so on the fourth day, Birmingham City Council decided to settle with the marches, to negotiate, and the marches ended. Next slide, please. But in the meantime, we had gone through, see, the Birmingham Fire Department brought out its water cannons. And so we had the hoses, and we'd been arrested. Next slide, please. And we'd had the dogs. And I was really afraid of dogs. And this picture is a famous picture. You see it, you know it's Birmingham. And I've questioned my father and this is a wonder I can take a dog now. I mean, this was my image of what a dog was. These Alsatians, these German shepherds. And they're attacking, as you can see with this man. But we were standing right there. I've said to my father, Daddy, we were right there. We were next to this man. Some days my parents marched with my sister and me. And so we were there right next to that guy. And this is a famous picture. So we saw this man, when he got attacked, pull out a pocket knife. He pulled out a pocket knife and he cut that dog's throat. And so we hear this growling, and then we see and we hear this yelp and we look, and there's the dog and there's blood coming from its throat. And then we just see like 30 or 40 police rush that man with billy clubs. And then we see him take him off, face down, spread eagle, arms flared out and legs out, and he's marched off. And the march continues. My father says, be calm, daughter, be calm, keep marching. And I always wondered what happened to that man. I always wondered. Let me know if I'm running over time here. Okay? Time-wise? Thank you. So I said to my father what happened. And one day when I'm visiting Birmingham, at the Birmingham Museum, the Civil Rights Museum, which is directly across the street from the 16th Street Baptist Church, I must have said out loud, I was looking at this picture. I said, what happened to him? This woman next to me, standing next to me, Black woman standing next to me. She said, oh, that's my uncle. This is serendipitous, right? She said, that's my uncle. They took him out and they beat him up real bad. And they kept him. We didn't know where he was for about a month. But then they let him go. He's all right. That did my heart such good to hear that he was okay. Because I never knew after that what had happened to him. And she told me, that was my uncle. They beat him up real bad, but then they let him go. So my father, in answering my question, was like, I said, Dad, we were right there, but we are not in any of the pictures. And he says, yes, daughter, but we weren't there to have our pictures taken. Okay, he's still daddy. Next slide, please. This is the slide of the young man during the Birmingham campaign, who to me demonstrates true nonviolent discipline. If you look at this picture, you see the stunned faces of the people around. The dogs are clearly being sicked upon this young boy. And in this picture, you can see he makes no attempt to even shield himself. He doesn't put his arm up. He doesn't begin to protect himself. So when I look at this picture, I think that's a person of courage. I could not have done that. Not at his age, not at any age, probably. That young man is practicing nonviolence. I don't know what happened to him either. But our vows or our pledges said, we will make no attempt to protect even ourselves. Okay, Tigana. True nonviolence, I think. This young boy. Okay, next slide, please. I think there are just a couple of more slides. Oh, yeah. So, and then next slide, and then we'll come back to this one. King met just on 2 occasions. He met with Thich Nhat Hanh, who's, the famous Vietnamese so-called founder of engaged Buddhism. Thich Nhat Hanh says, there we were practicing our meditation, but bombs were falling all around us. And we could hear people screaming. We could hear their screams. We could feel their suffering. And we could not maintain our meditations. We had to go out because people were suffering outside. This was the beginning of engaged Buddhism. And he talks about it in his book, Lotus, right? The Buddhist in a sea of fire. Because we, the US in particular, was dropping bombs and napalm and all that. They met each other. And after King died, Thich Nhat Hanh said he would do his best to try to bring about his friend King's beloved community. But this photo is of the press conference just before King goes to Riverside Church and gives his anti-Vietnam speech. He gave it on April 4th, 1967. Okay. So King, this is direct odds with the President of the United States, LBJ, who had signed the Civil Rights Act and had signed the Voting Rights Act into law. And here was King saying, I've got nothing against those people in Vietnam. Why should we be fighting them? The war is actually here. The war to be fought is to be fought against the 3 evils of this society. What 3? Militarism, consumerism, and racism. Or as Buddhists might say, hatred, greed, and delusion. Those 3. King read a little Buddhism too, you should know, when he was at Boston College, TCA. So I want to say that it was when King came out against the Vietnam War that he took a step too far. He'd been warned before putting children in the marches. But when he came out against the war, he came out on April 4th, 1967. Do you remember the date he was killed? April 4th, 1968. A year to the day that he came out against that speech. Now, if you go back to the slide just before this, King was shot in Memphis. And in Memphis, no, backwards. Yeah, that's okay. In Memphis, here it is. This is a picture from Memphis. All right, these are the sanitation workers. They were striking, and King went there to give them support. And while he was there, the next day at the Lorraine Hotel, King was assassinated, right? I want to show this for this reason. In Memphis, these folk, these men carried signs, these sanitation workers carried signs stating the obvious. I am a man, they said. Why? Because Black men, no matter their age, were referred to throughout the South as boy. Their servants, their children, like women in Aryan India, they are referred to as boy. So in Memphis, the big statement back was, I am a man. Sometimes you saw placards that said, I am somebody. Whew. Bless our hearts, right? And so when I say I'm old enough to see these things come around again, they come around again when we have to state the obvious. You wouldn't have to state it, right, if it were enacted. If people treated these men like men, they wouldn't have to say, I am a man. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. And then somewhere in between 67 and 2020, I met Lama Yeshe in 1969. And I mean, just look at it. Sweet. Loving, compassion, all those things. Mm-hmm. And I'm so happy about it. All right. And the next slide, please. Yeah. This was Lama's first trip to the US, 1974. I think we had Madison, Wisconsin, because he wanted to visit one of his teachers, who was Geshe Sopa, who was then an enrobed Lama at University of Wisconsin, Madison. And I had hair. Okay, next slide. Last one, I think. Nope. The George Floyd Memorial. So back to 2020 now. That was 1974. Now 2020. I'm sorry, this photo is more blurred than I thought it was. But you recognize it as and as a result of our having seen this brutal murder, this instant memorial goes up. And then once again, the movement that had been founded in 2013 by 3 Black women as a result of, you know who I mean. Oh, now my mind is totally blank. I'm so sorry. They founded, these 3 women, Topo, they founded the Black Lives Matter movement. Okay. Well, in 2013, but in 2020, it was rebooted, if you will. Next slide, please. And once again, people carry placards stating the obvious. I don't know if you remember when this movement first started, but there would be all these memes and all these tweets. Well, blue lives matter too. Well, yellow lives matter too. That sort of flippant response. This is a placard which states the obvious. And everybody understands that we're not singling out Black people over someone else. They're just saying, if Blacks were treated like their lives mattered, they wouldn't have to carry these placards. But we still have to do it in 2020. It's a shame. It's disgraceful. And yet, when these signs were first carried, there were hundreds, maybe hundreds of thousands of Black people. But after the George Floyd murder, there were more than 400 cities which took Black Lives Matter, took that kind of protest. It's still nonviolent protest, but there were millions of people, Black and other people, okay, carrying these signs that state the obvious. So when I say I'm old enough to have seen this come around twice, I mean from early times in Jim Crow South to the second time in my lifetime. I didn't think you'd have to have signs that stated the obvious a second time in this country. And yet we have. There's one last slide here. I have no doubt that if the Buddha were alive now, he would find it very comfortable to hold a sign that recognized the brutality that Blacks experience, because the Buddha was himself an activist. Well, I hope some of what I've said is helpful. It says that these struggles for freedom and liberation are continuous, that we must keep our eyes open, that we're in another critical juncture in this nation's history, and that we have to act. Thich Nhat Hanh said, once you see, you must act. It's not enough, the Dalai Lama says, to make prayers and say mantra. Dalai Lama, it is not enough to do those things. You must act. So Biden says, well, we have a choice, and one of the things we can do, the least thing we can do is vote, right? And maybe before that, we can ring some doorbells. Whatever is nonviolent that might help to turn the tide, to make hope a reality rather than hate, let's do that. And let's do it together. Okay. Thank you so much. I'd be happy to accept questions.
I have a question from the chat that I can start things out with.
Okay.
We have a participant who would love to know what Buddhist verse or practice or story most inspires your social justice work and lens.
There are two. I already mentioned one, that Dhammapada 183. Do no harm, practice virtue, discipline the mind. This is the teaching of all the Buddhists. I think it's just so clear, Buddhism in a nutshell. And the other is a Shantideva verse. And the Shantideva's verse, which I just think is so true, in 4 lines. Shantideva says at chapter 8, 129, I think is the verse. People say it's clear you're a Baptist, but as you like those chapters and verses, it's 129. It says, all the joy the world contains has come from wishing happiness for others, while all the misery the world contains has come from wishing happiness for oneself alone. I like that one. I think it's just so true. Okay. And they're good. I think those are good guidelines.
I see Emmy has a question. Emmy, unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Can you all hear me?
I would like to see you, and I'm
I'm
trying to see
somewhere
how.
in the sea of
Okay,
squares. Oh,
cool.
there we go. I got a
Yay.
feature
Hello,
thing.
everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Willis.
My
This
pleasure.
was such an amazing talk, especially after the events this week with
Mm,
President stepping down, and now we get to see Kamala Harris hopefully become the first Black woman, Southeast Asian woman president. Um, this is very culminating and auspicious.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I I think maybe my question is a bit loaded, so please don't feel afraid to be concise with what I'm about to ask. But I wonder, in your life experience and also your academic experience, how you could answer this. The intersection between privilege and protest, um, juxtaposed against the discipline, as you stated, that's needed to be nonviolent, and also the risk that's involved with all of that. And so, where I'm going with this right now in modern times, today, we can use an example of um, the genocide in Palestine, and America's involvement in that, the Israeli government's involvement in that, but more specifically, the protesters in America who have the privilege to be a voice for the Palestinian people, but don't necessarily have the inherent risk that is involved with such a movement that's not put forward by the Palestinian people. So all the protests we see from the 60s and 70s from Black Americans were Black Americans fighting for what Black Americans were owed. But now we see college students who have privilege to voice their opinion on these situations and act in ways that are maybe not appropriate to how the Palestinians would like their own issues to be um, to be brought to light. And some of that can be either language used, policy that's put forth, or like you're saying here, violence. So I wanted to know your thoughts on the intersection between privilege and protest, and how that also relates to co-opting certain issues and movements. If that was clear enough,
Thanks
please
for
let
the
me know.
question.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to answer it much more simply. Um, People in the struggle are happy for allies, happy for allies. So one has to take action how and where they can. So I don't fault protesters because they're not going to Palestine. Hmm? I think Buddhism wants us to have as much happiness as we can. And so if we're here, we're here, but they're not sitting comfortably. They're at least raising their voices. You know, we are against Israel killing these civilians. There has to be a stop to that. We have to find ways to do it. So first, I think we have voices. We can use them. So I think that's fine. I don't think that's co-opting anything. I think that's doing what you can where you are. I welcome it. Could it be any clearer than that? I welcome it. I'm not saying you break the windows at Columbia and take over the building and you threaten the president. That's violent, right? But making your voices heard, I totally disagree with this. Or we should have peace there. And we should talk about two-state solution. If you can use, we have these minds. Uh, okay, so I hope I answered that. That's okay. Use the privilege you have in a way that benefits others. The main thing is to benefit others. Buddhism has a fourfold. Yeah, I don't know if I should go. Anyway, we're supposed to. Shantideva might say, if we're looking at our actions, say speech, somebody says something harmful to us. All right, now let's see if we can be deliberate enough, patient enough to go through these 4 steps. is my response, so he triggers something. So we say count to 10, right? But Shantideva might say, go through these deliberations. Will my response, 1, be non-harmful to the other person? 2nd, will it be beneficial to the other person? 3, will it be non-harmful to me? 4, will it be beneficial to me? Now, if I can't say yes to all those things, Shantideva says, shut up. But if you can say yes to all 4 of the things, then hopefully you'll have a good response, something that will be helpful. Right? But Lama Yeshe, I think, would say, with a good heart, dear, do the best you can. Wouldn't he? Do the best you can, dear. With a good heart, that's good. That's all right, dear. Okay, Amy?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay.
We're
Effie?
just about out of time, but I was wondering if you wouldn't mind taking one more question. We have.
No, I
we
don't
have,
mind at all.
Okay, great. Susan, if you could unmute yourself.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Willis. I loved your talk. It was just, it's so wonderful to hear history told from a personal standpoint, and it's just wonderful. I so appreciate it. Thank you. But one of the reasons that I appreciate it so much is that we seldom hear this in Buddhist centers. It's like I visit online, go to different ones to meditate, and it's talk about social justice. It's like sometimes you get the feeling we don't want to talk about that because we don't want to alienate anybody, but yet there's a way to talk about it. It seems like we should all be talking about it. All Buddhist centers should be discussing it, because like you say, it is autocracy versus democracy that we're looking at. Or versus.
Yeah, I think we're at an urgent moment in our history.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to choose. And we're not awakened, we're not enlightened, but we know that people are being harmed. We know that it's our job as Buddhists, we hope, to do the best we can to help beings. And that's now, that's not lifetimes and lifetimes away from now. We're in the situation here. We're in this relative world where beings are suffering. Can we do anything to alleviate their suffering in the now, nonviolently?
But a lot of centers are okay to talk about that in the abstract, but not when it pertains to the next election. And so what is the easy way to get past that? I mean, to tone it, I don't know, to bring it up. And not set off alarm bells in people's heads.
Again, there are ways to put forth proposals, but thank your SPC and director. They invited me with this topic. So
yeah, I mean, like if I want to bring it up at other places where I visit, I want to do it in a productive way, in a way that is well received.
Okay, then you have to work on how you present it.
Yeah, okay.
That it's not angrily, it's not, it's that this is real, it's urgent. Well, I say urgent. I think it's urgent, just like the environment is urgent. We do something. And that's where I find that it's so, I say that I'm old. I say that a lot now and more often. But because I think the young folk have the energy and the talent and the creativity, that one of the things we can do with knowing a little about Buddhist meditation is come up with creative ideas, because the old ideas haven't worked so far. We're going to need something new. And that should invigorate us. We got to come up with something new, and it has to be done. There's no doubt about it. I'm so proud of the young folk I see who are out there coming up with these new ideas. I think of this guy who did the boat with the in the water with the nets. People said, "Oh, come on, we're talking about the ocean," you know. So he just did it, right? So every day there's 15,000 pounds of plastic garbage that he collects, right? You just do what you can do, and people may be naysayers, but you want to hear about something. It's important to you. You think it's important to the community and to the world around you. So try to present it in a way that makes it engaging and non-threatening. This is something I feel we could talk about as a group.
Yeah.
And you'll find that lots of, Joanna Mason says, she found herself one day just crying against that tree. And then she looked around and other people felt the same way. She said, I had no idea they would feel the same way. But I bet you find lots of people in the different centers who also want to talk about it because they live in the real world too, the relative world too.
Thank you.
I wish you luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You gave me a lot of good ideas. Thank you.
Okay, good, good.
Well, thank you so much. And Dr. Willis, thank you very, very much for all your time and energy and your wonderful slides. We really, really appreciate it. It's been so great having you here. And thank you to everyone who's attended.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for the great stories. This is amazing.
Okay, I'm glad. I worry about telling too many stories. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Please
Keep
come
well.
again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Keep
Thank you, Dr.
healthy.
Willis. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Effie. Thank you, Michael, for hosting.
Yes, thank you so much for the help.
Please.
Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you. We'll have you back
Bye.
again, I hope.
Thank you. I'm happy to come again.
And my suggestion for Susan, she can request of her SPC. Anyway, thank you, everyone. Good night. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Effie. Good night, everybody.